Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, I'm doing some trash to treasure thrift flips. For my first project, I'm going to be working on this hardcover book that I thrifted for $1. I'm going to be priming the surface first with Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in grey. I'm going to apply 2 coats of the primer over the entire outside of the book. I'm using primer for 2 reasons. 1, it's going to block the color of the original cover, and 2, it's going to make sure that my paint sticks and stays there. Once my 2 coats of primer were completely dry, I took out Paint Couture's Purple Haze and also my custom mix here. This is 2 parts Purple Haze and 1 part Cozy Beige chalk paint. And I'm applying it to the front cover of the book to start off with. I'm just doing it in a dabbing and stippling motion. I'm going on a little bit thicker than I would usually because I'm going to be coming in and doing a little bit of blending and a little bit of color variation. I want this to have quite a moody feel. So bringing in the darker purple with the lighter purple and just sort of blending it all in, I'm hoping will create that look. So as you can see, I'm just moving the dark purple around, also grabbing some of the light purple again, just really having a play and dabbing at it. Because my paint is still wet, I'm able to blend these colors together. Once I'm finished with the front cover, I am going to repeat the same process on the back. When my paint was dry, I took out IOD's Rose Chintz paint inlay. I'm going to be putting this just on the front cover. I'm just working out the approximate size here. Ideally, I want the florals to be going up vertically, so that's why I've cut it this way. I'm then going to be using Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin to use my paint inlay today. You need to apply a paint inlay to a wet top coat or some wet paint in order for it to actually work. I like to use clear coat. I'm then going to press my inlay into my wet clear coat, and I'm just smoothing that out, really pressing it into that little groove there. And then I'm going to use my mister to thoroughly dampen the inlay, and then a wet wipe to smooth it out and just to make sure that I have really good contact. I'm then going to let this dry completely. Once my inlay was completely dry, I then came in with my mister again and dampened that inlay again, and I gave it about 30 seconds, and then I started to pull it back. And the thing I love about paint inlays is that they really do have a lovely hand painted look, and you never really know exactly how it's going to turn out, but it is lovely. I then came in with my water mister and added a little bit more water to my inlay, and I'm going to use a paintbrush to start to reactivate and really work those paint pigments that are in the inlay, because these are actual paint pigments, so you're able to come in and do this. Ultimately, my goal for this was to make this look a little bit more like a watercolor or a painting instead of it being a more perfect look. And I'm going to be adding water to each of the florals and repeating the same process. I'm just sort of mixing the colors up. If it gets a little bit too heavy, I can use a wet wipe to pull back some of it. I'm also cleaning off my brush in between some of the more intense colors like the reds. And if you're going to do this, this will be to your liking how much you do this. As I said, I wanted it to look very much hand painted, very much like a watercolor, and I definitely wanted to soften the details in the florals. So this is definitely something that you can do, and I've seen it be used with some of the blue inlays to get that flow blue look. But I thought I would give it a try with this beautiful, more colorful rose chintz design. This is definitely one of my favorites. It's definitely got a lovely cottage sort of feel. I'm also going to be adding a bit of water to some of the leaves as well, again to soften them. And some of them I'm actually changing the shape a little bit of the leaves. And again, to your own liking, this may be a little bit too much for you. I just really wanted it to have a hand painted look. Once I'm finished doing this, I did let this dry completely. Next, I'm going to seal the entire book with Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin. Now, ordinarily, I would spray seal this first because, as you saw, you can reactivate the paint pigments with a water-based product. But I'm using a very light hand, and also if I do get a little bit of smearing, I actually don't mind. Remember, I want this to look hand painted. I want it to look a bit like a watercolor. So adding this is going to perhaps help add to that feel. When my book was dry, I took out IOD's Trimmings 1 mold. I'm going to add cornstarch to that center design there. Then I'm going to roll my clay out into a sausage sort of a shape, and then I'm going to start pushing that clay into that trim design. You definitely want to go slow here. It can be easy to have that clay sort of slip out, but I just sort of make sure I always have one hand in place, and then I run my fingers along and push out that excess clay. I'm then going to flex the mold and take the casting out. Next, I need to work out how much of the clay I need to cut off. So I've laid it on the book spine, and now I'm using a palette knife to cut off the excess. I'm then going to be using my Sealy's Quickset wood glue on the back of the castings, making sure I've got enough of that glue there, really spreading that out. And then I'm going to apply it to the spine of the book. I definitely had to mold this a little bit to the shape of the book spine itself, but just make sure you don't press too hard. I let my clay dry overnight, and the next day I took out Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic, and I'm just applying it to the spine section of the book first. And I really love how this metallic brings out the details in those beautiful IOD molds. If I inspire you to try any of the Paint Couture products used in today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. Once the bronze was dry, I took out Paint Couture's embossing medium, and I'm going to take some of that out and put it in a plastic container. I'm also then going to put a few drops of the Bronze Luxe Metallic into the embossing medium to tint it. Ultimately, I want to use the bronze, so this is going to be a good in-between color. I'm then going to take out this stencil by JRV. This is from the mini jar label stencil pack, and as you can see, I'm just applying the embossing medium over the top of the stencil using my palette knife. I've always got one hand holding the stencil in place to make sure it doesn't slip around, and this is just going to give a lovely raised effect. It's going to make more of an impact than if I had have just stenciled straight on to the surface. I wanted my book to have quite an old world feel to it, and this stencil definitely achieves that. I'm going to peel the stencil up, and then when that's completely dry and you can see I have cleaned the stencil, then I'm going to go in with Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic over the top. And this is just going to really give a lovely shine and really make the design stand out. When the bronze was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze. I'm first applying it over the top of the mold on the spine of the book, and this is going to sit down into all of those beautiful details and give it that vintage old world look that I am going for. I'm then using a wet wipe to pull back some of the excess and really allow it to sit down in those details. I also wanted to add some to the front cover, so I'm focusing on the little indent there on the left hand side near the spine. I am pulling back quite a bit, as you can see from other areas. We've got that clear coat down, so I'm able to pull back a lot. I'm going to add it over the entire front cover, but again, I don't want this to look too dark, but I still want it to have that feeling of age. And obviously, if this was a little bit too much for you, you could leave this step out, or you could go in with a white wax and lighten it up. I'm also going to be adding some of that glaze to the back cover. Once the glaze was dry, I decided to take out my brush that I'd used with the bronze, and I'm just going to run that over the top of the areas where the bronze is, just to bring back a little bit more of that shine. And here's a look at our finished project. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I think the paint inlay looks lovely with that water added to it, and the stencil definitely finishes off this book. Let me know what you think of this project in the comments. For For my next project, I'm going to be using this wooden frame blank that I thrifted. I'm going to take the back out first, and then I'm going to take out a plastic sheet and dust it with some cornstarch. I'm also adding that cornstarch to my rolling pin. As I've done many times before, I'm going to take out some of my dust air dry clay, and I'm going to start rolling it out on top of the plastic sheet there. And as you may have guessed, I am going to be adding this to the frame. So I'm going to add some of my Sealy's Quickset wood glue, and I'm going to spread that out, making sure that I've got really good coverage there. And then I'm going to be placing my rolled out clay on top. The clay is about 1 mil thick, maybe 1.5 mil. It's not a perfect measurement. I just roll it out until it looks the way that I want it to. I'm then going to use my palette knife to cut off the excess. I'm then going to use my fingers to pull the excess clay over the sides and create a bit of a jagged edge. Ultimately, I want this to have quite a primitive feel to it. I'm going to repeat the same steps as before and adding that glue and then adding the rolled out clay until I have the entire frame covered. You can see that I am piecing the bits and pieces together, and that's okay because I want it to have a sort of vintage rustic feel, very primitive like I've said, so the joins are not going to matter too much. I will soften them a little bit. You'll see that a little bit later how I do that, but ultimately the more texture that we can create, the happier I'll be, because that's the look we're going for. To soften some of the join lines, I used a mister and I misted the areas and then gently used my fingers to blend and work those areas together. While my clay is still wet, I'm going to be using IOD's Sprigs stamps, and I'm going to be pressing them into my wet clay. I want this to look like a piece that was obviously handmade, like it has been, but like dried flowers perhaps had been collected and pressed into the clay to preserve their likeness. I've seen a lot of these online and on Pinterest, and I think they look really lovely. As you can see, I'm using my fingers, and anywhere that I've got those outside stamp lines, I'm just using my fingers to smooth out those edges. I didn't really have a set plan for how I was going to lay out the Sprigs stamps. I just sort of went with what looked nice, and I also really love the variety of shapes that are in this stamp pack, so I definitely had a lot to choose from. For today's project, I am pressing these stamps into the clay for my design, but if you wanted to do a similar project but you didn't want to go to the hassle of the clay, obviously you could use these stamps as they were intended with ink or with paint. I let my clay dry overnight, and the next day I came in with Paint Couture's Buttercream chalk paint, and I'm going to be applying one even coat over the entire project. Now I'm only going to do one coat here because I am going to be adding some glaze a little bit later, and I don't mind if there's a little bit of color variation or patches where I've missed, because we are going for an aged rustic sort of a feel anyway. When the paint was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, and I'm going to be adding that over the top of the sections where we've pressed in those sprig stamps. So I'm really focusing on those areas. I'm not adding it anywhere else, and I'm only working in small sections here. And then I'm coming in with a wet wipe and I am wiping back some of the excess. If I wipe off too much, I can just come back in like I'm going to do here, apply a little bit more. I'm working in small sections because this paint is not sealed. Again, I want a rustic look, so I don't need it to be perfect. and I'm just really working that glaze into my impressions mainly, and then I'm pulling it back. I experimented with the directions that I was wiping back to see how I could make it so that more of the glaze was left behind. Sometimes I'm wiping horizontally, sometimes I'm going vertically, and on the edges you can see here I'm really working it into the uneven textures there, and then I'm loving how it looks with the glaze sitting down in it. This is definitely a fun project, and it definitely looks quite primitive and I think quite lovely. So I'm going to continue to add that glaze over the entire frame, and I love how the glaze is bringing out all of those details and the cracks and imperfections in the clay. Now, if you want to do this but you do not have access to glaze, you could create a brown paint wash out of a water-based brown paint and you could achieve a similar result, or perhaps you could use a brown wax. Once my glaze was completely dry, I then took out some art paper, and I'm just using the backing from the frame as a guide to cut out a piece of paper. We're going to create our own little artwork to go in the frame. Next, I'm going to be using one of the birds from the Bird and Bees stamp by IOD, and I'm also using their permanent black ink on the back of it there. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm positioning it in the center and pressing down. I do have this particular stamp on a piece of plastic, and I'm just moving my fingers around and then pulling the design straight up. And here's our finished project. I'm really pleased with how this all came together. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my final project today, I'm going to be working on this little wooden pot that I thrifted. I actually really like the paint job and the age that's already on there. So I am going to take out IOD's Painterly Florals Transfer. This is the lavender design from that pack, and I'm just working out here exactly where I'm going to have to cut, and then I'm going to cut off what I need. Once I've got that cut to size, I can see here because of the shape of the pot that I am going to have to separate out those different lavender pieces so that they can all sit along the bottom. I'm then going to peel the backing off one of them and then press it down. I'm then going to use the transfer tool that comes in the pack, and I'm going to start rubbing, and you can see I'm also lifting that transfer up but making sure that the design has transferred down before I go any further. This was quite a porous surface, so at times I did have to work a little bit harder, but as I said, I liked the finish that it had, so I didn't want to go in and add anything else. So I'm just going to continue adding the lavender around the base of the pot. I didn't go all the way around to the back, I just really wanted it focused on the front section. I often get asked about my pot projects if they are going to be suitable to be used outside. Unfortunately, this one will not because it has a transfer on it, and transfers don't generally do that great outside, unfortunately. So this will just be a lovely inside decor piece. You could definitely still put a plant on the inside, but probably not great for outdoors. Once I was finished adding the transfers, I took out Paint Couture's pitch black chalk paint, and I'm just going to be using this little French stencil that says jardin on it, which means garden, and I'm just going to be using that pitch black over the top of it. Now, I'm not using a proper stencil brush. Unfortunately, at this point, all my good brushes were not washed. That was my fault, so I'm just using this little artist brush here. So I did end up getting a few little bits of bleeding underneath, but that's okay. I am going to be adding in another color shortly over the top, so this is not going to be noticeable. So when the pitch black paint was completely dry, I then repositioned the stencil. You can see I've cleaned it as well, so I'm just offsetting that to the right hand side, and then I'm using some of Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic over the top of my original design. So the black will still be peeking through in certain spots, but it will be heavier in some areas, and then that beautiful bronze will be shining through as well. I just really wanted to bring in a little bit of shine to this project to give it a little bit of elegance. And then I sealed the entire project with Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in satin. And here's a look at our finished pot. I am really pleased with how this turned out. It was quite a simple flip, but I think it was definitely very effective. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video and that it's given you some ideas on how you can use your stamps, paint inlays, transfers to give your home decor a makeover. Let me know if you had a favorite project from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.